discussion to debate and bring in our panel. I'm joined now by Bar-Yoshafat, the Deputy Director of the Coalesced Policy Forum and a former candidate for the New Right Party of Israel. In London is lecturer Azam Tamimi. He's a presenter of Al-Hiwar TV channel and the author of the book Hamas, Unwritten Chapters. And in Washington, D.C. is Dave Harden. He's the Managing Director of the Georgetown Strategy Group and spearheaded USAID efforts in the occupied West Bank and Gaza. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Azam Tamimi, you heard from Yossi Kuperwasser. He's trying to give us some insight into the thinking there as to why the Israelis would have done this sort of thing and why, okay, it's okay for a ceasefire right now. What do you think?
Well, this has been going on in cycles simply because the siege has been maintained on Gaza. And despite previous agreements, despite a recent agreement reached through Egyptian brokerage, the Israelis have not complied with what was agreed upon. The people of Gaza are collectively being punished and pushed into a corner. And this is because the Israelis use Gaza for their own political ends, especially Netanyahu. Where Israel is becoming increasingly right-wing, increasingly racist, xenophobic as well. And the people of Gaza are being punished for all of this.
Bar-Yoshafat, are you happy that there's a ceasefire, that the killing has stopped?
I'm not happy with the ceasefire because usually in a ceasefire we cease and Hamas fires. And I think that we will have another conflict soon because there are people who want to murder Jews and some Jews who just don't like to be murdered. And apparently that causes a conflict in our area. I just find it a bit strange to call all of this event as something as if Israel is the aggressor. It began because Hamas fired over 700 rockets into Israel. I also really don't agree with the fact that there's a siege over Gaza. Gaza has a border with Egypt. Maybe Egypt also understands that there's a problem when all the people in Gaza are being controlled by a theocratical terrorist organization called Hamas, that in their charter they say murder Jews wherever they are. This is why we have violence. When Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, there was no siege. People assumed that 50,000 people from Gaza will enter Israel on a daily basis with no checking. But then Hamas took over, killed hundreds of people from the Palestinian Authority, and created basically a Hamastan, a terrorist state or entity on Gaza.
Okay, I'm going to get a response from Azam Tamimi in a second, but let me bring in Dave Harden to ask about the American angle here, because you worked within the system, within the U.S. administration, right? From the Trump administration, Israel is clearly the victim here. Hamas is the aggressor. I wonder if you think that if there's anything that the Trump administration can do right now that can be of value to bringing about positive change here.
So I'm pretty doubtful that the Trump administration can or will do anything that would be useful in deconflicting the crisis. I want to point out that I think, you know, your guests kind of illustrate the point that the Palestinians and the Israelis are destined to live together. Nobody's moving away. And so therefore, in that context, what do you do? And this is where the Americans can actually come in and help kind of guide and shape some policies that would provide for a better outcome and a better future for both people. And I will tell you, in 2005, during Gaza disengagement, there was also the questions about what to do in the northern West Bank within Jenin. And in Jenin, we opened up trade and massive economic opportunity. And in Gaza, economic pressure was intended to yield political change with Hamas. Gaza failed. There are no counterbalances in Gaza right now. And, you know, Jenin has been a good example of what's possible in many ways, not completely, but in many ways. And so I think the Trump administration is frankly absent, and they don't have the credibility, the authority, the relationships to help shape and kind of foster a better outcome.
Okay, so Azam Tamimi, we heard from Bar-Yoshafat giving a very pro-right-wing, pro-continuing to pound Hamas for as long as possible in Gaza for as long as it takes perspective. We heard Dave Harden hanging a question mark over what the Trump administration can do right now. With that in mind, what does Hamas do in Gaza?
What does it do in Gaza? Hamas is running.
What does it do now? What does it do?
Population under siege.
What would Sinwar do? What would Hania do? What would they be thinking right now?
I really don't know. You need to bring one of them and ask them that question.
What should they do?
Well, they should insist on lifting the siege. And anybody who claims that there is no siege on Gaza is simply lying. It's just like denying that the sun doesn't exist. Everybody knows. Ask international observers, ask the Americans, the people in the West, the people in the East, ask anybody, and they will tell you that for the past 12 years, the people of Gaza are being punished. Why is Israel denying fishermen, for instance, the freedom to fish? Even zones which were agreed upon in previous ceasefires were always violated by the Israelis. The Israelis want to push the Gazans further and further to the corner in the hope that they would probably rise against Hamas and topple the current regime. This is not happening because people know that their suffering is not because of Hamas. They are suffering because of Israel and its collaboration with some Arabs, including the Egyptians.
Okay, so Bar-Yoshafat, given that the siege has been in effect for more than a decade, yet, as you mentioned, the rockets still keep on coming, doesn't that suggest that the siege is not working?
Well, again, this is not a chicken and the egg story, and I think that if you learn a little bit of geography, you can see that Gaza has a border with Egypt. So to put the blame on Israel, it's kind of interesting. There was no quote-unquote siege. What happened was, again, that Hamas took over, began firing rockets at Israel, and then Israel said, well, if that's the case, we're not going to allow 50,000 people from Gaza into Israel on a daily basis. Furthermore, regarding the areas where Arabs in Gaza can fish and cannot use their fishing territory, that was because of many ships coming from Iranian money into Gaza. These ships had ammunitions, rockets, different guns were aimed at Israel, which is why Israel said, well, if that's how you're going to act with your access to water, we're going to make sure that after a certain area into the Mediterranean Sea, you will not be able to transfer large ships. The main issue here is what will be in the future. Now, I'm saying it's not because I'm happy, I'm very sad about it, but I think eventually Israel will just have to take Gaza back into Israel's sovereignty, because obviously the Arabs in Gaza are unable to control themselves in a way that really reflects anything with human rights. I think actually the Arabs in Gaza would be way better off under Israeli martial law, because right now what we have is that when people are protesting against Hamas in the streets, Hamas are shooting them, murdering them. Anyone who is even accused of being with some sort of correlation to Israel, they murder them. And I think, unfortunately, there's not going to be another alternative where Israel will not be able to accept all of these accusations against Israel as if Israel is the aggressor, when you have innocent Israelis, 500,000 in the beginning, and then 1.5 million Israelis under fire. Israel government will just not accept it. Doesn't matter if it's right-wing or left-wing government.
But Bar-Yoshafat, in order to redo an occupation of the Gaza Strip with soldiers on the ground, that might involve a really big war, that might involve killing tens of thousands of people. Would that be worth it for you?
I don't think it's a matter of worth it, and I just want to say it's not to occupy, it's to free Gaza from Hamas. I really hope that would not be the case. If
Free it
for
under
us not
martial
to have
law.
it, you have to take down Hamas.
Just like the West Bank is.
I would argue
just
that
like the West Bank is free.
I would
under
argue
Israeli
that for the
sovereignty right now.
I'm going to argue, well, first of all, Judea and Samaria has the Palestinian Authority. But I'm going to argue that under martial law, Arabs will have more human rights than under Hamas. But that's not the point. The point is not if I want to do it, it's the fact that I'm going to be forced to do it. Now, regarding the American administration, I have to say, as an Israeli, I appreciate all American administrations, even if it's from the Republican Party or Democratic Party. This current administration, I think I'm speaking on behalf of many Israelis, we really enjoy this administration. But in the end of the day, this is not a question for Americans. This is a question for Israelis and the Arabs in Gaza and the Arabs in Judea and Samaria. We will have to solve it ourselves.
Azam Tamimi, the suggestion that the Israelis feel that they might need to roll in the tanks again and actually physically occupy Gaza again. Tell me what that would mean.
Well, let's see them do it. Let's see them do it and see what happens.
Okay, what will happen?
Well, if your guest on the other side is threatening with military invasion, let's have an invasion and see what goes on.
Okay. Dave Harden, as we got this ceasefire announced, we had the Qataris pledging almost $500 million in aid to Gaza. So the Egyptians and the Qataris got together. We don't know exactly what was happening behind closed doors, but there's a ceasefire and it's holding for now, thankfully. Nobody's dying at this moment in time, right? You mentioned Janine earlier on in terms of economic development, right? Throughout this discussion, we've spoken about the economic deprivation in the Gaza Strip. Is that Qatari money going to make much of a difference and help prevent another flare-up?
No, it won't. And I want to make a few other points. In some regards, both of your other guests are, have elements of truth in what it is that they're saying. And the other thing that's striking is that both the Israelis and the Palestinians are smart people. Given the talent that we have here, even on this debate, you would think that we would be able to come up with some better solutions than martial law. I mean, the Israelis could do that they could decide to do that tomorrow. The consequences and the cost for the Israelis to reoccupy on a street-by-street basis Gaza is something that the Netanyahu government and others have thought about and rejected for the last 15 years. That's not in the cards. But it's also the case that the Palestinians need a better future. Hamas has not delivered that. They were elected in. There's no chance. There's absolute hopelessness on the streets in Gaza. There are no jobs. There's no opportunity. There's no vision. There's no future. There's nothing. And so with that in mind, I mean, we can't possibly come up with a better solution. Because what we're doing right now, this ceasefire, we're going to buy a few days, weeks, months. There's nothing between the fishermen can't fish and we open up the waterways so that Iran brings in ballistic missiles. There's nothing in between. I'm sure that we can come up with something in between.
Okay, well, it's a depressing situation for the moment. Thankfully, the ceasefire is holding, but a lot of people expect there to be another flare-up, and some expect a very big one sometime soon. We hope that is not the case. Gentlemen, I have to move on, but let me thank you for the moment. Dave Harden, Azam Tamimi, and Bar-Yoshafat. Good to have you on the Newsmakers.